Happy Saturday. It's July 5th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And we wish you all a very happy 4th of July holiday. But first, in the news. Okay, well, it happened. Trump's big, beautiful bill has been passed by both the Senate and the House. And yes, this will mean sweeping changes to American life. So, what to expect? Well, there will certainly be increases in spending on defense and immigration enforcement, definitely more taxes on university endowments, also cuts to things like Medicare and food stamps. And yes, the hallmark of the bill is going to be these sweeping tax cuts. And related to those, there is an anticipated $3 trillion increase in public debt that we are expected to accumulate over the next 10 years. Meanwhile, in Europe, we are wilting under what feels like a relentless string of heat waves. They have moved on temporarily, at least, maybe hopefully forever, from the UK, France, Italy, and Spain into Central and Eastern Europe. And meanwhile, there are wildfires burning in Greece, Portugal, and Turkey. So things are very hot, very fiery, but also very sunny, Michael. And we are going to talk about that sunniness here in the new issue of Airmail and on the episode of Morning Meeting.
Yeah, it was almost a year ago that a young man named Thomas Crooks tried to assassinate Donald Trump. Yet, all these months later, he and his motives are essentially a mystery, which is strange when you consider that the Warren Commission released its exhaustive report within a year after Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. But now our writer Rich Cohen has been looking into Crooks' life and death, and he's here with a revealing report. Then, everyone knows Burt Reynolds as the wry, handsome star of such 1970s hit movies as Deliverance and Smokey and the Bandit. But as Josh Karp reports this week, Reynolds also had a unique dream: to open a dinner theater next to a truck stop in the middle of Florida. Josh is going to join us to tell us all about Reynolds' ambition and what happened. And finally, if you're looking to get away this summer and you are dreaming of Italy, you might want to check into one of our favorite places, Il Pelicano, which just celebrated its 60th birthday. And Marie-Louise Schio, the owner of this magnificent property, will join us to tell us all about what makes the property so magical. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Michael, I'm sorry to say the news is the news, and we need to start with Donald Trump. Rich Cohen, an editor-at-large at Airmail, takes us back to the assassination attempt 1 year ago that may have changed the course of American history. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Rich, it's now been almost exactly a year since Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. Where have we come out? What have we learned? What do we know about the assassin?
Almost nothing, which has caused it to become a source of great conspiracy theories. We know what we knew, which is that he was kind of guy in high school who was very smart, but kind of a little asocial and alone. And he was into guns, and he went to the shooting range, and he's from a town of Pennsylvania. He almost fits like if you had ChatGPT create a lone gunman, this could be the kid.
He came from sort of a middle-class background, right?
Yeah, well, they really emphasized the middle-classness of it, and it was a middle-class background. But, if you've ever been in those towns outside of Pittsburgh, the whole area is a little bit like, I feel like something big happened there 80 years ago, and now it's emptied out. To me, this has always been football country. This is like where Johnny Unitas and Mike Ditka are from.
I find what's fascinating about him is, you note as well, when the context of this young guy's life is born 2 years, as you report, after the collapse of the Twin Towers. He was 13 the year Trump was first inaugurated. As you said, makes him a pure product of modern America.
Yeah.
You think of the influences on this young boy's life and what he's seen about America and thinks about America,
Well, I think it's a really scary thing, which is if you didn't live through something, if it's not actual living history, it seems unreal and things get forgotten and they get repeated. And we're moving to this period where for this whole new generation, 9/11 is something that they didn't live through, and they're open to the idea that it's a fiction, and everything's a fiction. And the idea that America is kind of this malign actor in the world, it's just completely alien to when we grew up, but it's sort of come of age since 9/11. And I always think back to Osama bin Laden's attacks, which is he hit us and there's been like a slow crumbling, it feels like, ever since. And I don't know if it's anything intended and with all the social media and everything, but it's like he grew up in that post 9/11 America where everything is paranoia, every narrative can be flipped. The most interesting thing is to turn the good guy into the bad guy into the good guy, and you're sort of on quicksand all the time.
Well, as you say, it's hard to get a clear picture of Crooks. Even his political leanings, as you say, who the hell knows, right? I mean, it just is, in some ways, to your point, it's like everything's kind of a game. Everything's up for just like, I'm going to spin it. I can make this argument about it, right? Rather than just because, well, you say that, I could say this. And what imagine this. And so everything's speculation, right?
Right. It's like fiction has people read less and less novels because the real world has replaced the novel. It's kind of magical realism of the newspaper. I think that the reason why we don't really talk about it is just what you're saying, which is he gave money to Republicans and Democrats. He was of no side, which means he can't be weaponized as one side against the other. There's nothing to do with him. But to me, it's almost like he's this lone guy in this little house outside of Pittsburgh. And it's like by entering history and by shooting Trump, he kind of proves that he's alive and he's real. It's like he's watching a video game and this is the way he can affect the video game. And weirdly, reading about him and thinking about him, I finally really understood Taxi Driver, the movie, and Travis Bickle, which is Travis Bickle's just trying to kill somebody that will get him noticed. That's it. He's like this atomized creature trying to sort of make a mark in the world, almost to prove he's alive.
Some of the things we do know, as you report in your story, is it was early July. I mean, his planning was very brief and seemed almost like he wasn't a good shot on his high school. Right?
I'm laughing about it, but I think, like I said, he felt like he was sort of alone, like atomized, like, and then the world, like history is like a parade, and it happens to pass right by his front door, relatively, which is suddenly Trump puts this town that's not very far from him on his schedule, and here's the opportunity. And if you're not a conspiracy theorist, you feel like something similar happened with Lee Harvey Oswald, which is suddenly he's working in this book depository and the parade route comes out and the president's driving right by his window. So here's his opportunity to sort of become a historical figure. And I feel like it's the same kind of thing. It was a crime of opportunity because the parade went by his front door.
As you note in your story, like unlike John Wilkes Booth, is like deliberate. I'm going to like seek this out and go toward it, right? As you say, people noticed him, but we don't really know how he did this, right?
Right. Well, John Wilkes Booth is part of a conspiracy with various actors trying to kill various politicians with the idea of sort of pulling victory out of defeat at the end of the Civil War. It's a completely different mindset.
Right. And basically decapitating the whole government.
Right. And then you get to this guy's more like Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's like modern America, post-World War II America, which is, it's almost like the underground man of Dostoevsky or something. I really do think that it was an act of showing that he was alive in some completely messed up, terrifying manner. There's a need for conspiracy theories by people because it makes sense of it. And, conspiracy is at least a plan. You can say it's a bad plan or it's an evil plan, but at least someone's in charge. When it's just a random nut in a house, it's terrifying because these assassinations determine what happens historically and there's no reason for them. So if this didn't happen, maybe Trump doesn't get elected. Completely changes history.
Right. I mean, Rich, it's an impossible question, right? And it's very difficult to quantify, but what is your theory about how the assassination attempt ended up galvanizing Trump and his campaign?
Well, we know that it drew all the Silicon Valley people to him because it was a display by Trump of male bravado and, defiance, that he stood up. They all talked about how cool it was that he stood up and yelled, "Fight, fight, fight," after he was, hit by a bullet or a piece of shrapnel or whatever it was, probably a bullet in the ear. Basically, it presented him in a completely different way than he was being presented at those debates. And it made him very attractive to people who saw kind of an old-time movie Western kind of guy standing up in defiance. So I think it helped him a lot. And, we'll never know. It's a counterfactual, but it's possible that it could have got him elected.
Do you think one of the reasons that Crooks as a character is so foreign to so many of us, is that simply just due to the media's reticence to cover criminals of this nature, because we don't clearly want to glamorize them? How does that fit into the way that we cover these sorts of issues?
No, I think that they do cover criminal. I mean, look at Luigi Mangione. He's been covered.
Yeah.
We know all about him, and we do know about these people. I think that, first of all, he's a failure. He didn't kill Trump. He failed at what he was trying to do. So we don't really like failures. And second of all, you're covering now a thing that didn't happen. So even though it had these huge implications, it didn't happen. Trump was helped by it politically and wasn't really very hurt physically. And I'm sure it was unbelievably terrifying, but he stood up. And then thirdly, like I said, when you start looking into him, he doesn't make sense. He's not a guy on the left. He's not a guy on the right. He's just like a random particle out floating around, the most dangerous kind, the individual, the lone gunman. And there's really nothing to do with it. It doesn't further the narrative and it doesn't fit the story. So eventually you just go on and tell the story without him. And I think that's what's happened.
It is fascinating, just like the randomness of history. And into that randomness, you have to sort of insert conspiracy because you're trying to create some sort of logical structure to it.
Right. You're trying to create order so it makes sense. So it's a story you can tell. It's like a car pileup. One car hits another car, hits another car, hits another car. None of it's on purpose. And your period of lifetime, you see like 3 accidents and then you're done. But it goes all the way back and it goes all the way forward. And it's a very scary way to see history. But you can almost write a counter narrative of American history based just on assassinations. Instead of presidents and governments, just assassins would be a way to tell the history of America, because it is such a big part of American life and has had such strong effects, starting with Abraham Lincoln and what might have happened with Reconstruction if Abraham Lincoln had lived to do what he wanted to do.
Rich, it's an incredibly sad and confusing story, but you tell it with a lot of passion and verve. So thank you so much for it.
Yeah, nice talking to you.
Well, Michael, I have to say, pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrific piece of reporting by Rich and a lot of material that I never knew. So if you haven't read it, please do take a look at it.
All right, Michael. Well, before we delve into Burt Reynolds, which I know is everybody's favorite topic, let's get Marie-Louise Schio on here to take us temporarily to Italy, where she operates 3 fantastic hotels: Il Pelicano on the Tuscan coast, La Posta Vecchia outside of Rome, and I hate to say it, Marie-Louise, my personal favorite, the Mezzatorre Hotel and Thermal Spas on Ischia. She is not only one of Italy's most fabulous hoteliers and personalities, but she also understands the good life in a way that few do, and she is here to take us inside the 60th anniversary of Il Pelicano, one of the most beloved hotels, not only in Italy, but all throughout Europe and the world. Welcome, Marie-Louise.
Hi, thank you. It's so happy to be here.
So for those who have not experienced the Pelicano, it is so much more than a hotel. It is a little slice of Italian heaven, and its history dates back 60 years, which we have just celebrated in true festive fashion this past weekend. But tell us a little bit about the history of the hotel and how your family got involved with it.
Well, it kind of is a result of a love story, of many love stories, I'm starting to find out. So it was built by an American-English couple who... She had read a paper. There was a page on this plane crash that happened in Syria. And the only survivor was this very handsome British aviator. And there was a picture of him. And so she kind of did a clipping and cut it and put it in her journal. Cut 2, she actually meets Michael Graham at some cocktail somewhere. And they decide to then go on a date at Pelican Point in California. They fall kind of madly in love, and then they decided that they want to actually celebrate their love and find a really special place in Europe where they could host all of their guests and do this kind of club. So they start looking in France and Portugal, and they just couldn't find the right spot. I think it took them years to find the right spot, and it was the last place they went to, suggested by a friend of theirs. There was Prince Borghese, who had this incredible lot of land on the Monte Argentario, was very not well known. They go there, they kind of fall madly in love with this place, and they decide to build their kind of love temple, and they call it Hotel Pelicano. So it was a very small hotel. I think there was 18 rooms and 8 rooms for drivers. And then they had started building these cottages that were owned by their fabulous friends, Charlie Chaplin, the Colemans, and this and that, the other, and, Douglas Fairbanks. Everyone had their friends had bought these cottages. And they ran it really like a club. So Italians were not welcome, or very small amount of Italians were welcome. And, my father would always say, you'd call and they say, the Italian contingent is closed. So no Italians really were allowed in. My dad was on a boat and does not particularly like that. He said, what is that? And his friend said, it's this Pelicano, but don't even think about getting in because you won't. They don't accept Italians. And he said, watch me. And he goes and arrives, and the first person he finds at the door is Charlie Chaplin. So he realizes that he arrived in some world that was very peculiar and different. That night they were having a party, the famous gala nights, so the Friday night galas, and the average age was a lot higher. And Charlie Chaplin says, please, will you dance with my daughter? It was Josie or Geraldine. I can't remember who it was. Because you guys are the youngest. And so my dad danced all night long around the pool, a bit like we did the other night, Ashley. And he started his love for the Pelicano, met my mom, who's American, and started bringing her there all the time. And that's how he bumped into the Pelicano and then, really fell in love with it. And when they decided to sell it, he was so in love with the place and wanted to protect it and had no idea of the hotel business. And he said, listen, you know what? I'll go for it. And he bought it bit by bit. In his late 50s, he went to Cornell Hospitality School. And then he dedicated himself to it until he passed over the baton. I don't know how you say that, but...
And you grew up at the hotel in some capacity, right? You spent so much of your childhood there. I mean, was it ever a dream of yours when you were young to take it over, or did that come later?
No, never a dream at all. It was a dream to kind of live there and look at this fabulous adult world made of people who were so happy and joyful and elegant. And I would hide behind the bushes to look at this world. It was kind of like living on a film set, really, because kids weren't allowed. And then Slamarans used to come all the time, and I always tried to make sense of this whole thing that was happening because it was my home, but there was also very random people in it. And I couldn't really understand the concept. What was that? And then when Slim arrived, I was always following him because I was trying to understand through his lens. I was like, and then there's someone photographing all of this? Like, what is this? So I was always very curious. I think I was his mini assistant in some way. I was always trotting around behind him. I never thought of it would, now I can see how it shaped me, but I never thought of doing that. I never even considered it a job. I always thought it was a boring job. It wasn't even a job. I just never crossed my mind. I studied architecture. I knew I wanted to do something creative. I didn't know what, but I studied architecture. Then I got into interior design. And that's when I went to RISD and he wanted to see a return on his investment. And he said, will you redo 2 bathrooms? And I said, fine. I thought, oh, fun. And then I said, I think you need to redo the whole Pelicano for a younger crowd because the average age was really quite high up there. And he just would do it. But it was the last thing on earth I was planning to do.
I mean, it's tempting to call you a hotelier, right? But you do so many more things than that. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Pelicano is so special because, it has your creative touch on every single element. You can really feel like you're walking into Marie Louise's world or the world of Isimo, which is do we call it a lifestyle brand? But, your kind of aesthetic outpost there. What is the most challenging part of running a hotel and an operation like Pelicano Hotels Groups? Because you have 2 others, La Posta Vecchia and the Mezzatorre in Ischia. What's the biggest challenge of running a company like that in 2025? Because it's quite different from, 60 years ago when the Peli was born.
Well, it's we have this project of buying more. So we actually bought another 3 hotels on top of the 3 we have. And for me, the challenge is what I really want to do kind of in life is really create a group of small hotels that are meaningful and that are impactful and that are full of soul and identity. And today you see everyone's getting into hospitality and you see so many, especially in Italy, so many big groups come in and which is great. But what we're losing, I think, in so many disciplines, not only in hospitality, but you see it in fashion, is kind of soul and a point of view. And so the challenge is how do you scale that? So we can have this conversation in 10 years, Ashley, and then you can tell me if I succeeded or not. But I spend a lot of times in the hotels, and the people who work there are so passionate, and there's so much of their own personality there as well, and that's what makes a difference. It's like it's like a good recipe. You need all the various elements, and obviously the staff is one of the key elements because you can have a beautiful property, but if you don't have the heart and soul that beats and the passion to make that magic every day, then. So it's to protect the soul of the places and to enlarge the group and never lose our DNA. And we're never going to do that because I'm stuck to it.
So you remind me of that book by Jess Walter, Beautiful Runes, and like how you I don't know if you've ever read that book, but...
No, but I'm definitely going to read it now.
You should read it. It's set in 1962 on the Amalfi Coast, and there's this Italian guy who's in the 6th town on the coast. That's the town that no one goes to. He's got this little hotel, and he's trying to make it something, and he's heard that Americans like tennis, so he built a tennis court. And anyway, this woman shows up who's an extra from Cleopatra being filmed in Rome. Anyway, you'd love it. It's a great story. But you're exactly right. The warmth and the personality that any great hotel brings, or home, I think, brings is and I'm really touched by how your father sort of found his way in, because, it reminds us that so many people come to a place and they're intimidated or they feel like they don't belong. But they come to one of your properties and they feel, I think it's got that soul still in it of the person who wants to be accepted, and you sort of come and you find your way in, and it lives on it. So it's not really a question, just I think a memory of how it's wired into the DNA of your places.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's this home, because also Posta Vecchia was our home, and Mezzatore wasn't our home, but it feels like it. And I think the approach of home is not to try and make your home away from home, because that's not the point of travel, I think. It's like, we don't want to be your home away from home. We want to be a world that you discover. We want to be, a little dimension that you step into.
Well, you're not wrong. Congratulations, Marie-Louise, on 60 years, and we can't wait to see what you do with them in the next 60.
Yeah, and we'll keep you posted.
Okay, well, Ashley, we're going to go from Italy to the Florida of the 1970s. Who knew that Burt Reynolds, at the height of his box office fame in that decade, decided to open a dinner theater in the land of gators? Well, Josh Karp did. Josh is the author of A Futile and Stupid Gesture, How Doug Kenny and National Lampoon Changed Comedy Forever, and other books. So please welcome Josh.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Okay, Josh, your story this week is so much fun. It takes us back to Florida in the 1970s, before it was full of the MAGA connotations that it has now.
Yes.
Once upon a time, Burt Reynolds opened up a dinner theater. I mean, such is the stuff of legend. First of all, how did this story come across your desk?
This is almost embarrassing. So I was probably 13 when that happened, because I was 79. And, I was always like just a total pop culture geek. And, and this is kind of on the heels of, growing up, watching Love Boat, watching Fantasy Island. And, I just remember it almost kind of in retrospect felt like it didn't exist. Because at the time I was like, Burt Reynolds has a dinner theater in Florida, and Abe Vigoda is doing, Death of the Salesman. He didn't do Death of the Salesman, but he did a different show there. Orson Bean is there, and, and Florence Henderson and Jim. And I was just like, this is the craziest thing, even when I was a kid. And then as I got older, I was always just kind of like, wow, did that really happen? And so I just, I was like, it just, so that is where, from the detritus of my mind and my misspent youth that this story arose.
I mean, Josh, when we think of Burt Reynolds, theater operator is not the first thing that comes to mind. How did he end up in this business?
He's a very complicated guy, which is kind of a funny thing to say about Burt Reynolds, but he was a complicated human being. His career, if you kind of look at his career, there were a lot of times where he had these choices. I think he wanted to be considered a really serious actor. And, when he was a movie star, at the time he opened this theater, he was the biggest movie star in the world for about 5 years and continued to be one of the biggest. And when you're getting paid $80 zillion to do, Smokey and the Bandit 2, it's hard to, go and do the artistic role, right? And he was always kind of in this, he did some, some serious films, but, he kind of always was Burt Reynolds. And I think somewhere inside of him, he always viewed himself as a really serious actor. And he really loved actors, and he loved his friends, and he loved Florida, where he was from. So I think, it was all this stuff together. So part of this was, he wanted to kind of give something back to the community he'd grown up in. And Jupiter, which is now, where Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy and Michael Jordan live. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody about when Tiger had his problems and, they had all the 24/7 coverage and all that. You just saw these mansions, from helicopters. There was nothing there. It was a swampy backwoods place with beautiful beaches. He wanted to open a theater for the people, for people who couldn't really see serious theater. And he did do serious theater there. He had Death of a Salesman with Vincent Gardenia and Julie Harris. The shows were so interesting because they kind of alternated between some really serious performers. Martin Sheen was in a bunch of shows there. And I think said at one point that the only two people who could get him on stage were Joseph Papp and Burt Reynolds, which is not something you would expect to hear. All these things got him to do the theater. And then you find out all these other people who were, just funny people and goofy, weird celebrities you saw on TV, like Dom DeLuise and Charles Nelson Riley. I mean, Charles Nelson Riley, of all people, I mean, I knew him from Match Game and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, right? And everybody there is like, they're like, he was a genius teacher. He was a brilliant director. He studied under Uta Hagen. His students back in LA were Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin and all. So he was like a really, Charles Nelson Riley, the Charles Nelson Riley was an incredibly respected acting teacher. So that, all those things, he liked to hang out with his buddies, and he loved theater, and he loved Florida, and he really wanted to be taken, kind of seriously as an actor. So those things kind of came together to make the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater.
I mean, and Josh, at the time, how was this theater being considered and treated in the theater-going community? I mean, did it become an attraction for performers and for theater lovers?
Yeah, it was in Florida, for sure. It was funny, like one of the attractions of it was that he wanted to have a place where they wouldn't have to deal with like New York critics, right? And then what kind of kills me is that the local critics would, just tear people apart, which was hilarious. I mean, hilarious in retrospect. I mean, like Jim Nabors starred in The Music Man, and he had never been on stage, and like he was crying and didn't know if he could ever act again. Parker Stevenson from the Hardy Boys got a terrible review. He was devastated. And one thing about Burt was he was extremely thin-skinned. So like some guy from a Chicago paper went down there, and I can't remember, he said something about, he called the place trash, and I think Burt sued him for $1 million for libel or so, I mean, just really like, he dressed down every critic who ever tore into one of these people. But, they drew really good crowds. I mean, one of the problems with the theater ultimately was, it was a big facility, nicely done and all this stuff. And he didn't pay people a lot of money, but it cost a lot of money to operate. And they had to be operating at 95% capacity to make money. And it was like a 450 seat theater or something like that. And they did that, maybe 2 or 3 out of the 10 years. But, overall, it was a money-losing venture. It was, I think, kind of a real success in terms of what he wanted to do with it.
And as you read detail in your story, though, the dream kind of all comes to an end in 89. He's $4 million in debt. This is after, he's had everyone from Dolly Parton, Stallone, Travolta all come down to see what he's doing, but he just can't kind of get it to profitability, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he would have loved to have kept it going. And at the same time, I think it really served to some real large extent its function for him. And he was very capable of being an extraordinarily difficult human being, and way more complicated than one would give in retrospect Burt Reynolds credit for. But he was a complicated guy, and he, was an emotional guy and all this stuff. But I think, people loved him and would do anything for him. I talked to Annie Potts. I talked to Mary Lou Henner. All these people. I mean, like they were just like, he was so magnetic and so warm, and he would really create this incredible atmosphere for them. And the other thing too was, I mean, these are people who'd never been on stage. Farrah Fawcett did a show there. One of my favorite stories was Farrah Fawcett did a show, and this was right after, shortly after she left Charlie's Angels, and she wanted to be taken really seriously, and she'd never been on stage. And I think it was either the tech or the dress rehearsal, and she was unbelievably nervous, like quaking in her boots. And Dom DeLuise was directing the show, and he thought he'd lighten the mood by charging in through the back of the theater during dress rehearsal, wearing like jodhpurs, a director's hat, carrying a bullhorn and a whip, and screaming, "Get the elephants back!" Like he's Cecil B. DeMille or something. And there are 3 people in the theater. It's her and Dennis Christopher from Breaking Away and one other person. And he started talking to her about her performance, and she was already edgy. And she just burst into tears because nobody had ever talked to her about performing. They'd always talked to her about her hair and her clothes. And she just started weeping and weeping. And this is one actress named Peggy Sheffield, who is wonderful, told me that, she's like, and one thing about Dom was, she's like, if somebody started crying, she's like, he would cry more and he would completely lose it. And so basically he started losing it. And the two of them were just sitting there weeping, and she's like, he was done for the day. He couldn't go on.
Well, Josh, if you've got to lose $4 million, there's certainly worse ways to do it.
Well, maybe between the 3 of us, we can restart it, right?
GoFundMe. Done. Well, Josh, thank you so much. Wonderful story. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Well, on that note, I know you've got some kind of distraction for us. Anything you can recommend, potentially?
I do, and I confess I'm kind of late to this. This is a film that had an enormous run in theaters a few months ago. Set many records, set the summer off in a big bang. Have you seen Sinners, Ashley?
I have not.
So it's the new film by Ryan Coogler, the great director who did the Rocky sequel and also other films. This is also with Michael Jordan. It's set, I'm not one for horror or scary movies, not my thing, but this movie's gotten such good raves. Had to check it out. It's now on streaming. It's set in 1932 in the Mississippi Delta, and it stars Michael B. Jordan, who plays two roles, criminal twin brothers who return to their hometown to start again, and they're confronted by supernatural evil. There's blues music woven in, the kind of birth of rock and roll. It's down on the Mississippi Delta. It is, as I said, super inventive. Jordan gives a terrific performance, and it's from a script by Coogler. I'm glad I checked it out. I really recommend it to everyone. It's called Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler, and it's streaming now. And you, my dear, what do you have for us?
Michael, you don't even want to talk to me. All I want to do right now is play tennis, wait for a new episode of Stick. And I can't even believe I'm going to confess this, but I am. I've been watching And Just Like That again, and I love it. Okay, I love it. I'm sorry.
What? You don't have to apologize for that. Why would you have to apologize?
I think I have a new relationship to it because I don't live in New York anymore. So for me, it's a little bit of a connection to the city. I look back at these people paying $400 on a mediocre meal and I think, no, I'm just kidding. I do miss New York terribly. And I love how ridiculous and expensive and bonkers and crazy everything about it is. And it's my little dose of NYC. So perhaps I should make like Gen Z and go back and watch all of Sex and the City in its entirety. But I think it's a really fun show. And frankly, a lot better than any of the Sex and the City movies. So we should give credit where credit is due there.
I was out recently at a restaurant opening in the neighborhood here. SJP showed up. And, I have to say, it's just always wonderful to see her out in the neighborhood. She's such a good sort of New York City resident and one of those people who shows up for the right things and the right causes. And yeah, I'm always kind of happy to see her out in the wild.
Okay, I will recommend something aside from And Just Like That. But have you been to Roscioli in New York?
For sure.
God, why is it so good?
Because it's like just as good as it is in Rome. Just if you can't get to Rome, and if you're going to Rome and you're passing through there on your way to Il Pelicano or somewhere, go there. But if you can't, and you're in New York this weekend for the holidays, go where Ashley's telling you to go.
I'm sorry, Michael. I'm going to make a controversial statement here, and I apologize to our listeners. I hope you guys are already out having a Negroni. I have to say, I think that the Roscioli in New York is actually better than the one in Rome at the moment. I'm sorry.
Whoa.
I know. Gauntlet thrown.
Porque?
It's a sexier space. It's cozier and more intimate. I feel like the one in Rome is kind of resting on its tourist laurels a little bit. It's still very, very good and solid. I just think the food is a little bit more creative and unexpected. And usually in my mind, that's kind of a bad thing, but it's not like they're trying too hard. It's just that, I don't know, everything is just extra good. I really I never remember anything about what I ate, but I remember all of the dishes that I had the last time I was at Roscioli. And I just love the feel of the space. It's so intimate. It's on such a cute little corner of Soho. To me, it's a win-win. I can't wait to go back.
All right. We got 2 places to go now.
I miss the food in New York. Sorry. I love you, New York. I still hurt you. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a wonderful weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Yeah, and happy 4th of July, and hope you're all eating and drinking and celebrating. So. Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis. And our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe. Enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We'll be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.